If there's one thing we need today, it is courage. Courage to stand for what is right, courage to stand for our convictions, courage to honor and follow Jesus regardless of cost or consequence. We have this repeated many times in the Gospels. Jesus said to his disciples or would-be followers, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever would lose his life for my sake in the gospel will find it. What exactly did Jesus mean when he said those words? If you try to save your life, you're going to lose it. If you lose your life for my sake in the gospel, you'll find it. I want to give you two inspirational examples. One from the life of Dr. Martin Luther King from 1965, and another from the life of Pastor Richard Wurmbrand from Romania. And I'll give you dates and background on that in a moment. So, Dr. King, in the midst of the civil rights movement, was confrontational. In other words, there would be public things that he and those working with him would do to take a stand, to make a point, but it was nonviolent resistance. There were freedom riders, white and black, riding buses together to protest segregation in the South. And the freedom riders would be attacked. Those standing with Dr. King in nonviolent protests would be attacked. So even though they were nonviolent, they were getting violently attacked. And some of the leaders said, hey, let's just step back. No, we shouldn't get violent, but let's step back from these nonviolent protests, these nonviolent acts of resistance, because too much violence is coming against us. So it is March 8th, 1965, Selma, Alabama. This is what Dr. King had to say.
We have no alternative but to keep moving with determination. We've gone too far now to turn back. And in a real sense, we are moving and we cannot afford to stop because Alabama and because our nation has a date with destiny.
I'm here to tell you tonight that the businessmen, the mayor of this city, the police commissioner of this city, and everybody in the white power structure of this city must take a responsibility for everything that Jim Clark does in this community. It's time for us to say to these men that if you don't do something about it, we will have no alternative but to engage in broader and more drastic forms of civil disobedience in order to bring the attention of the nation to this whole issue in Selma, Alabama.
Deep down in our nonviolent creed is the conviction that there are some things so dear, some things so precious, some things so eternally true that they're worth dying for. And if a man happens to be 36 years old, as I happen to be, and some great truth stands before the door of his life, some great opportunity to stand up for that which is right, he's afraid his home will get bombed, or he's afraid that he will lose his job, or he's afraid that he will get shot or beat down by state troopers. He may go on and live until he's 80, but he's just as dead as 36 as he would be at 80, and the cessation of breathing in his life is merely the belated announcement of an earlier death of the spirit. He died. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for that which is right. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for justice. A man dies when he refuses to take a stand for that which is true. So we're going to stand up right here amid horses. We're going to stand up right here in Alabama amid billy clubs. We're going to stand up right here in Alabama amid police dogs if they have them. We're going to stand up amid tear gas. We're going to stand up amid anything that they can muster up, letting the world know that we are determined to be free.
Let me quote those words one more time. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for that which is right. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for justice. A man dies when he refuses to take a stand for that which is true. If you save your life, if you try to preserve your reputation, your security, your following, your finances, whatever it is, you look at what's popular and not popular, you look at what's going to work and not work, and you say, okay, it's too costly to do what's right. If you do that, as Dr. King said, you may live into your 80s, but that's just breathing. You're existing. You're not really living because you died on the inside when you refuse to stand up for what is right. And conversely, when you stand up for what's right, and in this case, for Jesus, following Jesus, stand up for the gospel, follow him, as many have done in the Muslim world, and the Hindu world, and Jewish world, and other situations where there could be resistance or persecution or opposition. I'm going to do what's right regardless. You may die, you may be persecuted, you may be put in prison, you may lose friends, you may lose reputation, but you live. You found your life. Okay, second example is Pastor Richard Wurmbrand from Romania. I got to meet him and his wife Sabina in 1993 and spent time with them after that. But that day we spent a few hours together, and when you sit with Pastor Wurmbrand, of course with the Lord many years now, when you sit with Pastor Wurmbrand, you'd see indentations in the side of his neck where he was tortured. I mean, horrific torture he endured. In fact, let me put some pictures up for you. This was 1966. He was testifying before Congress about persecution of Christians in communist lands, and a lot of that was not reported or underreported, and there were many Americans who were so enamored with communism and praising its benefits and values. And Pastor Wurmbrand said, let me tell you what actually happens. And while testifying before Congress, he took his shirt off. And you can't obviously see fully from these pictures, these somewhat grainy black and white pictures, but you can see some of the holes in his body. All right, we've got one from the front, then another closer up, where you can actually see, right in the side of his arm, horrific torture he endured. Another from the back where you could see some of what he suffered. Literally holes in his body. And there's background to this. How is it he ended up in prison for 14 years? Spent several years in solitary confinement where the only face he saw for years was the face of his torturer. He was burned with red-hot pokers, and they just burn indentations in his body. He was frozen to the point of death and then given shots to revive him. He'd be put in these upright boxes. They were like coffins, and they had razor-sharp knives from every angle, and you'd go in there, and they'd close on you, and you couldn't move at all. The moment you moved the slightest bit, you'd be cut. And think of the sheer terror of that. Your muscles start to tense. The soldiers would watch in the prison through a hole in the side of the box, and when the person would pass out, in his case, pass out from bleeding, they would take him out. His wife Sabina suffered in a slave labor camp. How did they end up in those situations? And then miraculously, by God's hand, they lived to tell about it. Okay, let me share the story with you. It goes back to, if you save your life, you lose it. If you lose your life for the gospel and for the Lord, you find it. Here's how it is reported by Anna Walter. When Romania fell into the hands of the Russians in 1945, Wurmbrand found his work made more dangerous than it had ever been during World War II, because he and his wife, Jewish followers of Jesus. He'd been an atheist, communist, got wonderfully saved, and he spoke many languages, so he would reach out to the Germans, the Nazis, when they were occupying Romania. Then he reached out to the Russian soldiers, but now it's a communist government. There's more pressure. The communists believe Christianity to be completely incompatible with Marxism, And so they used every method at their disposal to cleanse the country of true believers. First, they sought to force pastors to swear their allegiance to the state, promising them the freedom to keep their churches open as long as they preached in support of communism. Early on in the regime, the government summoned a gathering of all the Christian leaders in Romania and called upon each of them one by one to affirm their loyalty to communism. As Wurmbrand listened uneasily to the confessions of his fellow ministers, Sabina turned to him and asked, "Will you not wash this shame from the face of Christ?" Just to stop reading for a moment, these Christian pastors, these Christian leaders, people who Pastor Wurmbrand knew personally, they were getting up and singing the praises of the communist government, the atheist, oppressive government. Why? To save their lives, to keep their churches and ministries going and open. So Sabina says to him, "Will you not wash this shame from the face of Christ?" When he responded that she would lose her husband if he chose to speak out, she boldly replied, "I don't need a coward for a husband." Convicted by her words, he then gave a rousing speech. So he gets up publicly, and he gave a rousing speech in which he wholeheartedly rejected Marxist doctrine and affirmed Christ Jesus as the sole head of the church. Although applauded by the other pastors for his bravery in reminding them of where their true allegiance ought to lie, Wurmbrand would later face the severe consequences of his actions, which had labeled him undeniably as an enemy of the state. This speech in front of the Congress, while bold, was one of the first of many greater risks he would be called upon to take in maintaining his loyalty to Christ. And this went out national radio. Everybody heard his address, and he became an enemy of the state and suffered 2 imprisonments. Things he got out after horrific torture and imprisonment, and then went back to preaching. Imprisoned a second time, and then he was ransomed by believers from the West. His wife Sabina suffered horrifically in a slave labor camp. They articulate the meaning of those words. If you save your life, you lose it. If you lose your life, Jesus said, for my sake and the gospel, you find it. Most of us will not face the opposition and the hardships that Dr. King did along with the leaders and participants in the civil rights movement, many of whom suffered violence, many of whom lost their jobs, some of whom were killed. Most of us will not face what Pastor Wurmbrand and Sabina faced, although believers around the world are facing those very things to this day. But most of us living in the West, at least at this point, we won't face those choices. But every one of us will face choices. On a daily basis sometimes, will we honor the Lord and do what's right, even if it's costly? Or will we choose convenience? Will we choose the easy way out? Will we choose compromising our convictions? Will we avoid the shame and reproach of the gospel and rather not be publicly or privately identified with Jesus and his cause in order to save our lives? If so, we lose him. We become a slave to social media opinion. We become a slave to finances. We become a slave to what people think. We become a slave to our security. And in that sense, even though we can go on breathing, we've died on the inside. Or will we do what's right in honor of the Lord, not as troublemakers, but as obedient servants? Will we do what is right and honor him and thereby save our lives? Jesus said, whoever would save his life will lose it. Whoever will lose his life for my sake and the gospel will find it.